FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Let me put the case for what Thaler and Sunstein call Libertarian Paternalism. A strange oxymoron, but that's their own phrase. And what they're trying to say there is that in their book, everything they say, you've still got the chance to opt out. So to give you an example from recent government policy, the Turner Commission on Pensions suggested that you should change the default setting so that you are automatically enrolled in a pension scheme unless you deliberately choose to opt out. So it's still within your power to say, no, I don't want to be part of the savings scheme. So it's not coercion, pure and simple, but it's to recognize the fact that most people find even their own financial affairs so dull, so complex, that they ignore them. It's a remarkable fact, but it's true. It's true of me too, so I'm not upbraiding anybody else. And so therefore you use that force of inertia to end up with an outcome which you yourself, in their terms, actually desire, which is to save more. And their point is, there's always a default setting, whether you set that or not. There is always a choice architecture, to use their term, and that you might as well try and devise that in such a way as to produce an outcome which is desirable for all concerned, rather than one which is undesirable. But very importantly, there's an opt-out. You don't have to do it. And so that, in that sense, they say there is an infringement of liberty, of course, when you're setting the choice architecture, but it's a very small one, and the trade-off is very much a positive balance. The second point they make is that strict neutrality is, in fact, impossible. I mean, this argument trails clouds of glory down through liberal philosophy about whether the state, as night watchman, is ever a feasible option. So their point is, there is always a default. You cannot be neutral between options, and there'll always be an implied direction, no matter what the state sets itself up as. The third thing to say for this line of argument, which is really conventional behavioral economics now, and in the conversation that's been arranged over the last 20 years between economics and psychology, which essentially has been psychology enriching the work of economics, you've got a richer account of decision-making. The heuristic of Homo economicus, in which man makes rational decisions responding to incentives, has been deepened and enriched by greater knowledge, empirical knowledge about what in fact inspires us, how we react, how we respond. Now, it fails one of my rules of thumb, which is, does my mum know that already? Because most of the things I read in behavioral economics, I found that actually my mum did know already, which is to say people are not rational, sometimes they do things that are inexplicable. In fact, my mum is an example of this. And so there is a sense of economists catching up with what we knew about people 20 years too late. But nonetheless, if we are predictably irrational, then that's a useful advance to our knowledge. And it remains to be seen whether we are. We may be unpredictably irrational, in which case it's not much use. But we do have a richer sense of how we make decisions, and that can be useful in the formation of public policy. The fourth point to be made in favor of this approach is that we have reached in lots of areas the limits of government action. I've noticed this in government all the time. It doesn't prevent people from wanting to push it even further. But when you're thinking about obesity, for example, or what people now call public health problems, but which are not strictly speaking public health problems because they're not contagious. It's fascinating to me that the language of behavioral economics has been imported from public health, 19th century public health questions, and they talk about obesity being contagious. And of course, it's not contagious in the original sense, in that you can desist from eating, you can exercise, you are at will to do something about it. But a contagion, properly speaking, is something which it's impossible to prevent by sheer act of will. But nonetheless, the language has migrated, and we're starting to talk about contagious diseases, such as obesity, or smoking, or alcohol. And government simply telling you what to do is not only illegitimate, in my view as a thoroughgoing liberal, it's also impractical. It doesn't work. There's no example anywhere of it actually working very well. So the search is on for a better alternative.